بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على خاتم الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين. I appreciate greatly the introduction that was just given, but I do take exception to one item. When I was introduced as British American, yes, I have a British passport and an American passport, but it may sound pretentious. There are only two qualities that are of any importance to me: being a human being and a Muslim. And that, for me, in terms of identity, is enough. And in fact, identity politics seems to me to be one of the rackets that is being, perpetrated now on a very broad scale in this country and probably elsewhere. Anyhow, although that is somewhat relevant to our concern today, let me pass on to the principal topic. In preparation for today, I was looking again at the letter that Malcolm X wrote after performing the Hajj, and it reminded me of other accounts of the Hajj that have been written over the centuries in a whole variety of languages. A subject on which I happen to have been working fairly recently: Persian, Turkish, Arabic, and so forth. And of course, those accounts are very much lengthier than the letter written by Malcolm X after his return from the Hajj. But one salient feature they do have in common: the overcoming of difficulties. The difficulties recounted by Hajj in earlier centuries, whether they were coming from Central Asia, West Africa, overland, traversing great distances under conditions of great hardship in many cases. Their journey was marked by continuous difficulty, but continuous persistence, until they arrived at their goal. And of course, such difficulties have now largely been overcome by the availability of modern means of transportation and so forth. But in the case of Malcolm X and his Hajj, it occurred to me that his arrival at the Hajj had also been preceded by a whole series of difficulties and hardships which he strove mightily to overcome, and with the help of Allah did overcome. The difficulties, the miseries of oppression suffered in America by those of African descent for decades upon decades, in addition to those to which he was individually subject. And certainly not the last stage in his journey, but a decisive stage in his journey came when he indeed arrived at the Kaaba, when he was able to perform the Hajj. It should be remembered in general that any authentic performance of the Hajj is not simply a journey to a given place at a given time. Any pilgrimage, Hajj after all in Arabic, has the etymological sense of intention. It is an intention. I mean, one often reads of a few European Christians who, in the service of imperial powers, masqueraded as Muslims and went to the haramain in the 19th century to see what was going on. And then they wrote books saying, I performed the Hajj. No, they didn't perform the Hajj. They went to Mecca and they watched other people performing the Hajj. Essential to the Hajj is intention. And the intention is precisely what yields the result. The intention not that underlies the journey and gives value and meaning to it. One can say that this makes itself evident in a large number of ways. For example, the abandonment of one's normal mode of dress. You leave behind not only your place of residence, you even leave behind your customary mode of dress. And you merge with those fellow pilgrims who have similarly abandoned their customary mode of dress. And the mode of dress we call ihram, or the ceremony of donning this mode of dress is ihram. Ihram implies what? Yeah, not simply the fulfillment of a legal obligation for the performance of the Hajj. It implies also an inward purification. In other words, you make yourself worthy, or at least less unworthy, to enter the haram that is the house of Allah. There is an abandonment of the self. And insofar as one abandons the self, one inevitably, almost automatically, merges with that vast mass of humanity that has similarly abandoned its own self. In other words, one finds oneself not standing there as the member of a given ethnicity or the speaker of a given language, but as one human being standing before Allah, in the house of Allah. This matter of the Hajj being, what should we say, a journey to the true self, a journey to the heart, has of course been expressed in many ways over the centuries, particularly in poetry. And indeed, it has been said that the true Hajj is the pilgrimage, the Hajj that is undertaken, not to that building, but rather to that which the building represents, i.e. the heart that is the locus of faith, the heart which is in the last resort that to which Allah and His messengers address themselves. In typically hyperbolic fashion, the Persian poet Jami says the following: Ka'beh bunyad Khalil Azar ast, Del nazargah Jalil Akbar ast. The Kaaba is built by Al-Khalil, i.e. Ibrahim, the son of Azar, whereas the heart is that upon which the glorious and almighty casts his gaze. And of course there is here an apparent contrast, an apparent elevation of the heart over the Kaaba, but in reality the two are the same. You journey towards your innermost being when you journey towards the Kaaba. And engaged in tawaf, again, a circumambulation simply of a structure without understanding, without perception, however dimly and imperfectly, of what that structure represents. This is not a complete tawaf. If we turn now to precisely what Malcolm X said, of course, using an entirely different language and an appropriately different language, he says that everyone forgets himself and turns to God. And out of this submission to the one God comes brotherhood, a brotherhood in which all are equals. In other words, insofar as the self is forgotten, whether it be the self in the moral sense of the ego, or if it be the self in the narrowly defined sense of a certain speaker of a certain language, a certain coming from a certain geographic origin, if that self is forgotten and then one turns to God, then necessarily, automatically, inseparably, that submission creates brotherhood, a brotherhood in which all are equal. And he also says, Islam brings together in unity all colors and classes. Everyone shares what he has. Those who have share with those who have not. Those who know teach those who don't know. This, of course, is a statement of what Malcolm X witnessed on that particular occasion in Mecca on the occasion of the Hajj. He said also, the very essence of the Islamic religion in teaching the oneness of God gives the believer genuine and voluntary obligations towards his fellow man. The true believer recognizes the oneness of all humanity. There are those present here today who are infinitely better acquainted with the biography of Malcolm X than I am. But I must say that given the cloudy misrepresentation of Islam to which he had previously been subject, the clarity, the simplicity of these formulations I find truly remarkable. The true believer recognizes the oneness of all humanity. And those of us who have had the privilege of going on the Hajj, and inshallah to some degree have fulfilled its true purposes, will also have benefited in the same fashion. Once we are speaking of the Hajj, of course our particular concern today is Malcolm X and his Hajj, which took place at a certain time. But I think it's also appropriate to draw attention to two connected topics. Number one, the current state of the haramain. Traditionally, the haramain, down to the early years of the 20th century, were an important center for scholarly and spiritual tradition. Interchange among scholars, Sufis, that came from different parts of the Islamic world and met there without supervision or interference by any political power, to connect, to construct broad networks of connection. They were centers of learning, in other words, not simply centers of pilgrimage. Also, in the 19th century, we find that they were centers of political inspiration. I alluded earlier to the European powers infiltrating their spies into Mecca and Medina to see what was going on. Why? Because they were terrified that once they came together, Muslims from territories ruled by colonial powers such as Britain, France, Russia, Holland, would, as it were, compare notes and draw up plans for joint action. And in some cases, that indeed happened. There were a number of uprisings that took place against Russian rule in the Caucasus and Central Asia that followed immediately on, or not necessarily immediately, but soon after the return of certain sheikhs from the Hajj. This now, of course, has been brought to an end. It has to be said that the current administration of the haramain, which has, of course, been there for quite some while, has effectively destroyed this function of the Hajj in particular, and the haramain more generally. What is underway now is the promotion of a consumer culture in Mecca, Medina. Buildings of great historic value are destroyed, and the notion of scholars from different parts of the Muslim world meeting with each other, exchanging knowledge and wisdom, and going beyond that to make plans for joint action. This, of course, is entirely unthinkable. It has to be said that the Wahhabi Saudi regime is engaged now in a program of architectural and I would say also spiritual destruction in the haramain, which is worse than what the Zionists are doing in Jerusalem. In fact, that is simply one among several similarities between the and parallels between the Wahhabi Saudi regime and the Zionist regime. Which brings me to one final point, again drawing on what Malcolm X said, namely the sense of unity. Where is the unity in the Muslim Ummah today? The unity that one desires is, to state the obvious, lacking. Disunity would not be too bad, but mutual slaughter is another thing. We have now a scenario in Syria which has become so atrocious as to be almost commonplace. That is, Muslims, in the name of Islam and in their own distorted understanding of Islam, slaughtering at will. The sense of brotherhood is gone, is denied, or it is restricted so narrowly that the Muslim who does not believe like you is fair game. All of this is in ignorance of the simple principle that whoever calls a fellow Muslim a kafir, murtad, an apostate, without cause, thereby himself becomes an unbeliever. A condition of Islam is to recognize as a fellow believer whoever prays towards the Qibla. It's as simple as that. We are all, alhamdulillah, Ahl al-Qibla, we're therefore all Muslim, and we have no right to condemn each other on the basis of whatever particular legal or theological school we follow. Also, Malcolm X said that based on what he observed on the Hajj, everyone shares what he has. Those who have share with those who have not. Well, those who have, who are they in the Muslim world today? Those who have. They're above all these petro-monarchies that have vast incomes. And where do they spend the incomes? Where do they spend the money? On luxury. While, shall we say, just across the Red Sea, in Somalia, in other parts of Africa, people are dying of starvation and of hunger. All of this, of course, could be expanded on in great detail. But I think when we remember Malcolm X and his instant insight into the essence of Islam, it behooves us not also to remember how far we are away from that depiction of the ideals of Islam. And of course, unfortunately, our powers to affect anything that is happening in the Muslim world today are extremely limited. But at least let us, as a community, unite around that which we truly believe in. And no more dispute about matters that may separate us. No more clothing of individual rivalries and enmities in some kind of doctrinal garb. Sometimes I think of the Quranic phrase, كُلُّ حِزْبٍ بِمَا لَدَيْهِمْ فَرِحُونَ. Every group is happy with what it has itself. And being happy with what it has itself, it assumes that everyone else is on the wrong path. I can remember, I hope you'll forgive me for terminating with a personal anecdote. I mean, many years ago, after I first embraced Islam, traveling in the Muslim world, and people would, they realized I was Muslim, and they say, yes, very nice, but what kind of Muslim are you? Have you taken, in other words, do you believe exactly like me? No, some cases I did, in some cases I didn't. A sense of unity, in other words, has to embrace a sense of tolerance and of acceptable diversity. So, this is what I had to say, and forgive me for my incoherence. I'm an old man. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Takbir.